Chapter 16, Philadelphia. Lewis worked all the last week of September for the Swan boatman in the Boston Public Garden. He was a great success and was becoming famous. On Saturday, the boatman paid him $100 in cash, which Lewis placed carefully in his money bag. The boatman, after paying the first night's bill at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, decided to let Lewis sleep on the lake instead of in the hotel, and this suited Lewis better. He slept with the ducks and geese on the lake, floating gracefully on the surface of the water, his head tucked under his wing. Lewis took good care of his trumpet. He kept it polished, and once a week he cleaned the spit out of it. He learned new songs whenever he could, by listening to people's radios and by attending concerts. He was very good at remembering music he had heard. He was really a natural-born musician, or in his case, a natural-hatched musician. One song he liked was "Beautiful Dreamer, Wake Unto Me." Whenever he played it, he thought of Serena, and always when he finished it, the passengers on the Swan boat clapped loudly and cheered. Lewis liked applause. It made him feel light-hearted and happy. Sometimes at the end of the afternoon, Lewis played "Now the Day is Over." He made it sound sweet and sad. One afternoon, when he was leading the last trip of the day, he played "The Cradle Song" by Brahms. The passengers sang the words. "Lullaby and good night, with roses bedight." A boy in the front seat of the boat pulled an air rifle from under his jacket and began shooting BB shots at Lewis's trumpet. Whenever a shot hit the horn, it made a pinging sound, so the cradle sounded something like this. "Lullaby, ping, and good night, ping, with roses bedight, ping." The children on the boat roared with laughter when they heard this, but the grown-up passengers were angry. One of them seized the boy's rifle. Another went home that night and wrote a letter to the Boston Globe urging a stronger gun control law. On some afternoons at the end of the day, people gathered on the shores of the lake to listen while Lewis played taps. It was a peaceful scene, a memorable hour. The Swan boat had never enjoyed such popularity or made such a lot of money for the owner. But Lewis knew that the boats would not run all winter. In a few days, the boats would be hauled out for the season, to wait quietly for the arrival of spring. One day, when Lewis was waiting for the boat to take its passengers aboard, a Western Union messenger boy appeared on a bicycle. "I have a telegram for the Swan," he said. The boatman seemed surprised, but he took the telegram and handed it to Lewis, who opened it promptly. It was from a man in Philadelphia. The message said, "Can offer you $500 a week for nightclub spot, 10-week engagement. Please reply. Signed, Abe, Lucky Lucas, Hotel Nemo." Lewis did some quick figuring. $500 a week for 10 weeks, that was $5,000. $5,000 would easily pay his father's debt to the music store. He took his slate and wrote, "Offer accepted. Arrive tomorrow. Meet me at Bird Lake in the zoo. Splashdown will be at 4:52 p.m. Hope this will be a convenient time for you." Lewis showed the message to the Western Union boy, who copied it on a telegraph blank. "Send it collect," wrote Lewis. The messenger nodded and rode away. Lewis stepped back into the water, the boat's lines were cast off, and Lewis led the way. He knew it was his last appearance with the Swan boat, and he felt a little sad. It was a warm, quiet Sunday afternoon, the last Sunday in September. Lewis played all his favorite tunes, "Lazy River," "Beautiful Dreamer," "Oh, Ever in the Greening Spring," "Now the Day is Over," and then, as the boat neared the dock, he raised his trumpet and blew taps. The last note echoed from the walls of the Ritz and lingered over the public garden. It was a sad farewell. For the people of Boston, it meant the end of summer. For the boatman, it meant the end of the best week of business he had ever had. For Lewis, it meant the end of another chapter in his adventurous life, out in the big world trying to earn enough money to get his father and himself out of trouble. Lewis slept peacefully that night, being very careful that his money bag was safe. Next day he flew to Philadelphia, to keep his appointment with Mr. Lucas, the man who had sent the telegram. Lewis had no trouble finding Philadelphia. Almost anybody can find Philadelphia who tries. Lewis simply rose into the air with all his things around his neck, and when he was about 1,000 feet high, he followed the railroad tracks to Providence, New London, New Haven, Bridgeport, Stamford, Coscob, Greenwich, Port Chester, Rye, Mamaroneck, New Rochelle, Pelham, Mount Vernon, and the Bronx. When he saw the Empire State Building, he veered off to the right, crossed the Hudson River, and followed the railroad tracks to Newark and Trenton and points south. At 4:30, he reached the Schuylkill River. Just beyond, he spied the Philadelphia Zoo. Bird Lake looked very attractive from the air. It was crowded with waterfowl of all kinds, ducks and geese mostly. Lewis thought he also saw 2 or 3 swans. He circled, picked an open spot, and exactly at 4:52 he splashed down. His trumpet banged against his slate knocked against his metal rapped against his chalk pencil, and his chalk pencil on its string wound itself around his money bag. All in all, the splashdown caused quite a commotion. The ducks and geese were not expecting anything like this to happen, a big white trumpeter swan dropping down out of the sky loaded with personal possessions. Lewis paid no attention to the other birds. He had a date to keep. He saw a man leaning on the wide railing in front of the birdhouse. The man was dressed in a purple suit and wore a Tyrolean hat. His face looked shrewd and wise, as though he knew a great many things, many of them not worth knowing. That must be Abe Lucky Lucas, thought Lewis. He swam quickly over. "Coho," he said through his trumpet. "My pleasure," replied Mr. Lucas. "You are right on time. The splashdown was sensational. Welcome to the Philadelphia Zoo, which crawls with rare mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fishes, including sharks, rays, and other fish-like vertebrates. Watch out for wild animals. This place is replete with them. Snakes, zebras, monkeys, elephants, lions, tigers, wolves, foxes, bears, hippos, rhinos, woodchucks, skunks, hawks, and owls. I seldom come here. My work confines me to the throbbing heart of the city, among the money changers. I am under great pressure from my work. How was your trip from Boston?" "Smooth," wrote Lewis on his slate. "I made good time. What about my job?" "A happy question," replied Mr. Lucas. "The job will start on October 15th. The contract has been finalized. Your place of employment is a nightclub of great renown across the river, a place of high fashion and low prices, a jumpy joint. You will be called upon to make appearances each evening except Sunday and play your trumpet for the happy customers. Once in a while you can join a jazz group. Lewis the Swan on trumpet. The pay is very good. My spirits are lifted by thinking about the pay. Wealth and happiness are around the corner for Lewis the Swan and Lucky Lucas the Great of Heart. My agent's fee is 10%, a mere bagatelle." "How do I get to the nightclub?" asked Lewis, who only understood about half of what Mr. Lucas was saying. "In a taxicab," replied Mr. Lucas. "Be at the north entrance of the zoo, Girard Avenue and 34th Street, at 9 o'clock on the evening of October 15th, a night that will live in memory. A cab will await your pleasure and will transport you to the club." The driver is a friend of mine. He, too, is under pressure from his work. "Who's going to pay for the cab?" asked Lewis on his slate. "I am," replied Mr. Lucas. "Lucky Lucas, the generous of heart, pays for the cab for Lewis the Swan. And by the way, I see that you are wearing a money bag and that it is plump with moolah. I suggest, from the kindness of my great heart, that you turn this money bag over to me for safekeeping during your stay in Philadelphia, a place of many thieves and pickpockets." "No, thank you," wrote Lewis. "We'll keep money bag myself." "Very well," said Mr. Lucas. "And now there is one other small matter I must bring to your attention. Most of the birds that swim on this luxury lagoon have undergone surgery. Candor compels me to tell you that the tip of one wing is usually removed by the management, a painless operation, popular with zoos the world over. Pinioned is the word for it, I believe. It detains the water bird and prevents him from leaving the narrow confines of this public park and rising into the air, because when one wing is shorter than the other, the balance of the bird is upset. His attempt to take off would be crowned with failure. In short, he can't fly. Sensing in advance the revulsion you would feel toward having the tip of one of your powerful wings removed, I approached the man in charge of birds and laid before him a proposition. He has agreed not to clip your wing. It is arranged. He is a man of honor. Your freedom of movement is assured. You will not be pinioned. But in return for this so great favor on the part of the management of the Philadelphia Zoo, you are to give a free concert here at the lake every Sunday afternoon for the people of Philadelphia, the peasantry, who come here to refresh themselves. Is it a deal? Yes, wrote Lewis. We'll give Sunday concert. Good, said Mr. Lucas. Farewell for the nonce. Be at the north entrance at 9. October 15. A cab will await you. Play well, sweet Swan. You will be the finest thing that has happened to Philadelphia since the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Lewis didn't understand this, but he nodded good-bye to Mr. Lucas and swam off toward the island in the center of the lake. There he stepped ashore, straightened his things, preened his feathers, and rested. He was not sure he was going to like his new job. He was not sure he liked Mr. Lucas. But he needed money badly, and when you need money, you are willing to put up with difficulties and uncertainties. One good thing about the whole business was the zoo itself. It seemed like an extremely nice place, in spite of what he had heard about having your wing clipped. Lewis had no intention of having a wing clipped. I'll sock anybody who tries that on me, he said to himself. He was pleased to see many other water birds. There were many kinds of ducks and geese. In the distance he saw 3 trumpeter swans. They were old residents of the lake. Their names were Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy. Lewis decided he would wait a day or two before making their acquaintance. Bird Lake has a fence around it. When the night came for him to start work, Lewis polished his trumpet, put on all his things, flew over the fence, and landed at the north entrance. He was there promptly at 9. The taxicab was there, waiting, just as Mr. Lucas had promised. Lewis got in, and it was driven away to his new job. Chapter 17. Serena. During the next 10 weeks, Lewis got rich. He went every evening except Sundays to the nightclub and played his trumpet for the customers. He did not like the job at all. The place was big and crowded and noisy. Everyone seemed to be talking too loudly, eating too much, and drinking too much. Most birds like to go to sleep at sundown. They do not want to stay up half the night entertaining people. But Lewis was a musician, and musicians can't choose their working hours. They must work when their employer wants them to. Every Saturday night, Lewis collected his pay, $500. Mr. Lucas was always on hand to receive his agent's fee of 10% from Lewis. After Lewis had paid Mr. Lucas, he still had $450 left, and he would put this in his money bag, hop into the waiting taxicab, and return to Bird Lake, arriving at around 3 a.m. His money bag grew so stuffed with money, Lewis was beginning to worry. On Sunday afternoons, if the weather was good, crowds of people would gather on the shores of Bird Lake, and Lewis would stand on the island in the middle of the lake and give a concert. This became a popular event in Philadelphia, where there isn't much going on Sunday. Lewis took the concert very seriously. By playing for the people, he was earning the right to remain free and not have a wing clipped. He was always at his best on Sundays. Instead of playing jazz and rock and folk and country and western, he would play selections from the works of the great composers, Ludwig van Beethoven, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Johann Sebastian Bach, music he had learned by listening to records at Camp Kookooskoos. Lewis also liked the music of George Gershwin and Stephen Foster. When he played Summertime from Porgy and Bess, the people of Philadelphia felt that it was the most thrilling music they had ever heard. Lewis was considered so good on the trumpet, he was invited to make a guest appearance with the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra. One day, about a week before Christmas, a great storm came up. The sky grew dark, the wind blew a howling gale, it made a whining noise. Windows rattled, shutters came off their hinges. Old newspapers and candy wrappers were picked up by the wind and scattered like confetti. Many of the creatures in the zoo became restless and uneasy. Over in the elephant house, the elephants trumpeted in alarm. Lions roared and paced back and forth. The great black cockatoos screamed. Keepers rushed here and there, shutting doors and windows and making everything secure against the awful force of the gale. The waters of Bird Lake were ruffled by the strong, mighty wind, and for a while the lake looked like a small ocean. Many of the water birds sought protection on the island. Lewis rode out the gale on the lake, in the lee of the island. He faced the wind and kept paddling with his feet, his eyes bright with wonder at the strength of the blast. Suddenly he saw an object in the sky. It was coming down out of the clouds. At first he couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it's a flying saucer, he thought. Then he realized that it was a large white bird, struggling desperately to come in against the wind. Its wings were beating rapidly. In a moment it splashed down and flopped ashore, where it lay sprawled out, almost as if it were dead. Lewis stared and stared and stared. Then he looked again. It looks like a swan, he thought. It was a swan. It looks like a trumpeter swan, he thought. It was a trumpeter swan. My goodness, said Lewis to himself, it looks like Serena. It is Serena. She's here at last. My prayers have been answered. Lewis was right. Serena, the swan of his desiring, had been caught by the fierce storm and blown all the way across America. When she looked down and saw Bird Lake, she ended her flight, almost dead from exhaustion. Lewis was tempted to rush right over, but then he thought, no, that would be a mistake. She is in no condition at the moment to perceive the depth of my affection and the extent of my love. She is too pooped. I will wait. I will bide my time. I will give her a chance to recover. Then I will renew our acquaintance and make myself known. Lewis did not go to his job that night. The weather was too bad. All night he stayed awake, keeping watch at a slight distance from his beloved. When morning came, the wind subsided. The skies cleared. The lake grew calm. The storm was over. Serena stirred and woke. She was still exhausted and very mussy. Lewis stayed away from her. I'll just wait, he thought. When in love, one must take risks, but I'm not going to risk everything with a bird who is too tired to see straight. I won't hurry, and I won't worry. Back home on Upper Red Rock Lake, I was without a voice. She ignored me because I could not tell her of my love. Now, thanks to my brave father, I have my trumpet. Through the power of music, I will impress her with the intensity of my desire and the strength of my devotion. She will hear me say, "Coho!" I'll tell her I love her in a language anybody can understand, the language of music. She will hear the trumpet of the swan, and she will be mine. At least I hope she will. Usually if a strange bird appeared on Bird Lake, one of the keepers would report its arrival to the head man in charge of birds, whose office was in the birdhouse. The head man would then give the order to have the new bird pinioned, have one of its wings clipped. But today the keeper who usually tended the waterfowl was sick with the flu and had not come to work. Nobody noticed that a new trumpeter swan had arrived. Serena was being very quiet anyway. She was not attracting any attention. There were now 5 trumpeters on the lake. There were the original 3 captive swans, Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy. There was, of course, Lewis, and now there was the new arrival, Serena, still exhausted but beginning to revive. Toward the end of the afternoon, Serena roused herself, looked at her surroundings, had a bite to eat, took a bath, then walked out of the water and stood for a long while preening her feathers. She felt distinctly better, and when her feathers were all smoothed out, she looked extremely beautiful, stately, serene, graceful, and very feminine. Lewis trembled when he saw how truly lovely she was. He was again tempted to swim over and say "Coho" and see if she remembered him. But he had a better idea. There is no hurry, he thought. She's not going to leave Philadelphia tonight. I will go to my job, and when I get back from work, I shall abide near her all through the night. Just at daylight, I'll awaken her with a song of love and desire. She will be drowsy. The sound of my trumpet will enter her sleepy brain and overcome her with emotion. My trumpet will be the first sound she hears. I will be irresistible. I will be the first thing she sees when she opens her eyes, and she will love me from that moment on." Lewis was well satisfied with his plan and began to make preparations. He swam ashore, removed his things, hid them under a bush, then returned to the water where he fed and bathed. Then he fixed his feathers carefully. He wanted to look his best next morning when the meeting was to take place. He drifted around for a while, thinking of all the songs he liked and trying to decide which one to play to wake Serena in the morning. He finally decided to play "Beautiful Dreamer, Wake Unto Me." He had always loved that song. It was sad and sweet. "She will be a beautiful dreamer," thought Lewis, "and she will wake unto me." The song fits the situation perfectly. He was determined to play the song better than he had ever played it before. It was one of his best numbers. He really knew how to play it awfully well. Once, when he played it at one of his Sunday concerts, a music critic from Philadelphia newspaper heard him. The next morning the paper said, "Some of his notes are like jewels held up to the light. The emotion he transmits is clean and pure and sustained." Lewis had memorized that statement. He was proud of it. Now he was anxious for morning to come, but he still had his job at the nightclub to go to. He knew the night would be long and that he wouldn't be able to sleep. Lewis swam ashore to pick up his things. When he looked under the bush, he received a terrible jolt. His medal was there, his slate and chalk pencil were there, his money bag was there, but where was the trumpet? His trumpet was gone. Poor Lewis, his heart almost stopped. "Oh no," he said to himself, "oh no." Without his trumpet, his whole life would be ruined. All his plans for the future would collapse. He was frantic with anger and fear and dismay. He dashed back into the water and looked up and down the lake. Far off, he saw a small wood duck that seemed to have something shiny in its mouth. It was the trumpet, all right. The duck was trying to play it. Lewis was furious. He skimmed down the lake, going even faster than he had on the day he had saved Applegate from drowning. He swam straight for the duck, knocked him on the head with a swift blow from his wing, and grabbed the precious trumpet. The duck fainted. Lewis wiped the horn and blew the spit out of it, and hung it around his neck where it belonged. Now he was ready. Let the night come. Let the hours pass. Let morning come when my beautiful dreamer wakes unto me. Night came at last. 9 o'clock came. Lewis went off to work, riding in the cab. The zoo quieted down. The visitors had all gone home. Many of the animals slept or snoozed. A few of them, the great cats, the raccoon, the armadillo, the ones that enjoy the night time, prowled and became restless. Bird Lake was clothed in darkness. Most of the waterfowl tucked their heads under their wings and slept. At one end of the lake, the 3 captive swans, Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy, were already asleep. Near the island, Serena, the beautiful Serena, was fast asleep and dreaming. Her long white neck was folded neatly back. Her head rested on soft feathers. Lewis got home from work at 2 in the morning. He flew in over the low fence and splashed down near Serena, making as little noise as possible. He did not try to sleep. The night was fair and crisp, as nights often are just before Christmas. Clouds drifted across the sky in endless procession, partially hiding the stars. Lewis watched the clouds, watched Serena as she slept, and waited for the day to come, hour after hour after hour. At last, a faint light showed in the east. Soon, creatures would be stirring. Morning would be here. "This is my moment," thought Lewis. "The time has come for me to waken my true love." He placed himself directly in front of Serena. Then he raised the trumpet to his mouth. He tilted his head. The horn pointed slightly upward toward the sky, where the first light was showing. He began his song. "Beautiful dreamer," he played, "wake unto me." The first 3 or 4 notes were played softly. Then as the song progressed, the sound increased. The light in the sky grew brighter. "Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee." Each note was like a jewel held to the light. The sound of Lewis's trumpet had never before been heard at this early dawn hour in the zoo, and the sound seemed to fill the whole world of buildings and animals and trees and shrubs and paths and dens and cages. Sleepy bears dozing in their grotto pricked up their ears. Foxes, hiding in their dens, listened to the sweet and dreamy sound of the horn blowing at the coming of light. In the lion house, the great cats heard. In the monkey house, the old baboon listened in wonder to the song. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. The hippo heard, and the seal in his tank. The gray wolf heard, and the yak in his cage. The badger, the coon, the ring-tailed coati, the skunk, the weasel, the otter, the llama, the dromedary, the white-tailed deer, all heard, listened, pricked up their ears at the song. The kudu heard, and the rabbit, the beaver heard, and the snake who has no ears. The wallaby, the possum, the anteater, the armadillo, the peafowl, the pigeon, the bowerbird, the cockatoo, the flamingo, all heard. All were aware that something out of the ordinary was happening. Philadelphians, waking from sleep in bedrooms where the windows were open, heard the trumpet. Not one person who heard the song realized that this was the moment of triumph for a young swan who had a speech defect and had conquered it. Louis was not thinking about his large, unseen audience of animals and people. His mind was not on bears and buffaloes and cassowaries and lizards and hawks and owls and people in bedrooms. His mind was on Serena, the swan of his choice, the beautiful dreamer. He played for her and for her alone. At the first note from his trumpet, she woke. She raised her head, and her neck straightened until her head was held high. What she saw filled her with astonishment. She gazed straight at Louis. At first she could hardly remember where she was. Directly in front of her she saw a handsome young male swan, a cob of noble proportions. Held against his mouth was a strange instrument, something she had never seen before, and from this strange instrument came sounds that made her tremble with joy and with love. As the song went on, as the light grew stronger, she fell hopelessly in love with this bold trumpeter who had awakened her from her dreams. The dreams of night were gone. New dreams of day were upon her. She knew that she was full of sensations she had never had before, feelings of delight and ecstasy and wonder. She had never seen a finer-looking young cob. She had certainly never seen any swan with so many personal possessions around his neck, and she had never been so thrilled by a sound before in her whole life. Oh, she thought, oh, 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 oh. The song ended. Louis lowered his trumpet and bowed solemnly to Serena. Then he raised his horn again. "Coho," he said. "Coho," replied Serena. "Coho, coho," said Louis through his trumpet. "Coho, coho," replied Serena. Each felt drawn to the other by a mysterious bond of affection. Louis swam once rapidly around Serena. Then Serena swam once rapidly around Louis. This seemed to amuse them. Louis dipped his neck and pumped it back and forth. Serena dipped her neck and pumped it back and forth. Louis splashed a little water into the air. Serena splashed a little water into the air. It was like a game. It was love at long last for Louis. It was love at first sight for Serena. Then Louis decided to show off. "I'll play her my own composition," he thought, "the one I made up for her last summer at camp." Again he raised his trumpet. "Oh, ever in the greening spring, by bank and bower retiring, for love shall I be sorrowing, and swans of my desiring." The notes were clear and pure. They filled the zoo with beauty. If Serena had been in any doubt before, she no longer was. She succumbed completely to this charmer, this handsome musician, this rich and talented cob. Louis knew that his plan had succeeded. His beautiful dreamer had waked, and she had waked unto him. Never again would they be parted. All the rest of their lives they would be together. Thoughts of small, quiet lakes in the woods where canebrakes grew and blackbirds sang filled Louis's mind. Thoughts of springtime and nesting and little cygnets. Oh, ever in the greening spring. Lewis had been told once by his father what happened to deep-sea divers when they go far, far down into the ocean. At great depths, where the pressure is great and the watery world is strange and mysterious, divers sometimes experience what they call the rapture of the deep. They feel so completely peaceful and enchanted, they never want to return to the surface. Lewis's father had warned him about this. "Always remember when you dive deep," he had said, "that this feeling of rapture can lead you to your death. No matter how wonderful you feel down there, don't ever forget to return to the surface, where you can breathe again." Looking at Serena, Lewis thought to himself, "I think love is like the rapture of the deep. I feel so good, I just want to stay right where I am. I'm experiencing rapture of the deep even though I am right on the top of the water. I have never felt so good, so peaceful, so excited, so happy, so ambitious, so desirous. If love is like this on a cold day in December in the Philadelphia Zoo, imagine what it's going to be like in spring on a remote lake in Canada." These were Lewis's secret thoughts. He was the happiest bird alive. He was a real trumpeter swan at last. His defect of being without a voice had at last been overcome. He felt very grateful to his father. Cautiously, he placed his head across Serena's long, beautiful white neck. It seemed a very daring thing to do, but she seemed to like it. Then he backed away. Serena swam toward him. Cautiously, she placed her neck across his neck. It rested there for a moment, then she swam away. "What a daring thing," she thought, "but he seems to like it. How pleasing to know that I have found an acceptable mate, a cob that I can love and respect, a cob that appears to be not only musical but also quite wealthy. Look at all those things," said Serena to herself. Her eyes feasted on the trumpet, the slate, the chalk pencil, the money bag, the life-saving medal. "What a wonderful cob," she thought. "What a dressy fellow." They swam off together toward the other end of the lake, where they could be alone. Then Lewis, who was short on sleep, dozed off, while Serena ate her breakfast and fixed herself up. Chapter 18. Freedom. The news of Serena's arrival on Bird Lake had finally reached the head man in charge of birds. He went out to look at her and was delighted. Then he gave an order to one of his keepers. "See to it that she is pinioned this morning, right away, before she flies off and leaves us. That swan is a valuable bird. Make sure she doesn't get away." Lewis was just waking up from his nap when he saw two keepers approaching Serena, who was standing on the shore near the ornamental fence. One keeper carried a large net with a long handle. The other carried surgical instruments. They were sneaking up on Serena from behind, very slowly and quietly. Lewis knew right away what they were up to. He grew hot with rage. If those men succeeded in catching Serena and cutting a wingtip, all his plans would go wrong. She could never fly away to a lonely lake with him. She would have to remain in Philadelphia the rest of her life. A horrible fate. "This is my moment," thought Lewis. "Nobody is going to clip my love's wing while I'm around." He hustled over to the island and stripped for action. He chucked his trumpet and all his other stuff under a willow tree. Then he returned to the water and waited for the right time to attack. The keeper holding the neck was crawling quietly up on Serena from the rear. She did not notice him. She was just standing there, dreaming of Lewis. Slowly, slowly, the keeper raised his net. As he did so, Lewis went into action. Lowering his long, powerful neck until it pointed straight out in front of him like a lance, he streaked across the water, straight at the keeper, his wings beating the air, his feet beating the water. In a flash, he reached the scene and drove his strong bill straight into the seat of the man's pants. It was a well-aimed jab. The keeper doubled up in pain and dropped the net. The other keeper tried to grab Serena by her throat. Lewis beat him over the head with his wings, striking terrific blows and knocking the poor fellow off his feet. Surgical instruments bounced into the air. The net fell into the water. One keeper groaned and held his hand on his behind where he had been stabbed. The other keeper lay on the ground, almost knocked out. Serena slipped quickly into the water and glided gracefully away. Louis followed. He motioned for her to stay on the lake. Then he raced back to the island, grabbed his trumpet, his slate, his chalk pencil, his medal, and his money bag, flew over the balustrade, and walked boldly into the birdhouse. He was still mad. He went straight to the office of the head man in charge of birds. He rapped on the door. "Come in," said a voice. Louis entered. The head man was seated at his desk. "Hello, Louis," he said. "Coho," replied Louis through his trumpet. "What's on your mind?" asked the man. Louis placed his trumpet on the floor and took his slate and chalk pencil from his neck. "I'm in love," he wrote. The head man leaned back in his chair and put his hands behind his head. His face had a faraway look. He gazed out of the window for a moment in silence. "Well," he said, "it's natural that you're in love. You're young. You're talented. In a couple of months, spring will be here. All birds fall in love in springtime. I suppose you're in love with one of my young swans." "Serena," wrote Louis. "She arrived the day before yesterday. I used to know her slightly back in Montana. She loves me, too." "That doesn't surprise me," said the head man. "You're a very unusual cob. Any young female swan would fall for you. You're a great trumpeter, one of the best. I'm delighted to hear about this love affair, Louis. You and your bride can stay right here on Bird Lake and raise your family in comfort and safety in the oldest zoo in the United States." Louis shook his head. "I have other plans," he wrote. Then he set his slate down and raised his trumpet. "They say that falling in love is wonderful." It was an old song by Irving Berlin. The room was filled with the sound of love. The head man had a dreamy look in his eyes. Louis set his horn down and took up his slate again. "I'm taking Serena away with me in a day or two," he wrote. "Oh, no, you're not," said the head man firmly. "Serena now belongs to the zoo. She is the property of the people of Philadelphia. She came here because of an act of God." "It wasn't an act of God," wrote Louis. "It was a high wind." "Well, anyway," said the head man, "she's my swan." "No, she's mine," wrote Louis. "She's mine by reason of the power of love, the greatest force on earth." The head man became thoughtful. "You can't take Serena from the zoo. She will never fly again. My keepers clipped one of her wings a few minutes ago." "They tried to," wrote Louis, "but I beat them up." The head man looked surprised. "Was it a good fight?" "It was a fair fight," replied Louis. "They were sneaking up on her from behind, so I sneaked up on them from behind. They hardly knew what hit them." The head man chuckled. "I wish I'd seen it," he said. "But look here, Louis, you've got to realize the position I'm in. I have a duty to the people of Philadelphia. Within the last couple of months, I've acquired 2 rare birds by accident, you and Serena, 2 trumpeter swans. One arrived here blown by a gale, the other to keep a nightclub engagement. The whole business is most unusual for a zoo. I have my responsibility to the public. It is my duty as head man in charge of birds to see that Serena stays. You yourself, of course, are free to leave when you want to, because Mr. Lucas insisted that you remain free when we arrange for your Sunday concerts. But in Serena's case, well, Louis, she's got to have her left wing tip amputated. The zoo can't afford to lose a young, beautiful, valuable trumpeter swan just because you happen to be in love. Besides, I think you're making a great mistake. If you and Serena stay here, you'll be safe. You'll have no enemies. You'll have no worries about your children. No fox, no otter, no coyote will ever attack you with intent to kill. You'll never go hungry. You'll never get shot. You'll never die of lead poisoning from eating the shotgun pellets that are on the bottom of all natural lakes and ponds. Your cygnets will be hatched each spring and will live a long life in perfect ease and comfort. What more can a young cob ask? "Freedom," replied Louis on his slate. "Safety is all well and good. I prefer freedom." With that, he picked up his trumpet and played, "Button up your overcoat when the wind blows free." The head man smiled. He knew just what Louis meant. For a while, the two remained silent. Louis put his trumpet aside. Then he wrote, "I ask 2 favors. First, put off the operation on Serena until after Christmas. I'll guarantee she won't try to escape. Second, let me send a telegram." "Okay, Louis," replied the head man, and he handed Louis a sheet of paper and a pencil. Louis wrote out a telegram to Sam Beaver. It said, "Am in the Philadelphia Zoo. This is an emergency. Come at once. I will pay your plane fare. Am now wealthy. Signed, Lewis. He handed the telegram to the head man, along with $4 from his money bag. The head man was astounded. In all his days at the zoo, this was the first time one of his birds had asked him to send a telegram. And of course, he didn't know who Sam Beaver was, but he sent the wire and ordered his keepers to let Serena alone for a few days, which they were glad to do. Lewis thanked him and left. He returned to Serena, and they spent the day happily together, bathing, swimming, eating, drinking, and showing each other in 1,000 small ways how much they loved each other. Sam arrived at the zoo on the day after Christmas. He was equipped as though he were going into the woods. Under one arm was a sleeping bag neatly rolled. On his back was a rucksack containing his toothbrush, his comb, a clean shirt, a hand axe, a pocket compass, his notebook, a pencil, and some food. In his belt was a hunting knife. Sam was 14 now and big for his age. He had never seen a large zoo. He and Lewis were overjoyed to see each other again. Lewis introduced Sam to Serena. Then he opened his money bag and showed Sam his earnings. $100 bills, $50 bills, $20 bills, tens, fives, ones, and some silver coins. A great pile. Goodness, thought Sam, I hope she's not marrying him for his money. Lewis took his slate and told Sam about the fight with the keepers and about how the head man wanted to keep Serena captive by clipping the tip of one wing. He told Sam it would ruin his life if Serena were to lose the power to fly. He explained that as soon as his father's debts were paid and the trumpet honestly belonged to him, he and Serena intended to leave civilization and return to a wild life. The sky, he wrote on his slate, is my living room. The woods are my parlor. The lonely lake is my bath. I can't remain behind a fence all my life. Neither can Serena. She's not built that way. Somehow or other we must persuade the head man to let Serena go. Sam stretched out on the shore of Bird Lake and clasped his hands behind his head. He looked up at the great wide sky. It was a clear blue, with small white clouds floating slowly across. Sam knew how Lewis felt about freedom. For a long time he lay there thinking. Ducks and geese swam slowly by, back and forth, an endless procession of captive birds. They seemed happy and well. Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy, the three trumpeters, swam by and peered at the strange boy lying on the ground. Finally Sam sat up. Listen, Lewis, he said, how's this for an idea? You and Serena intend to raise a family every year, don't you? Certainly, replied Lewis on his slate. Okay, said Sam. In every family of cygnets, there is always one that needs special care and protection. Bird Lake would be a perfect place for this one little swan that needs extra security. This is a beautiful lake, Lewis. This is a great zoo. If I can persuade the head man to let Serena remain free, would you be willing to donate one of your cygnets now and then if the zoo needs another swan for the lake? If you agree, I'll go right in and see the head man about the matter. It was now Lewis's turn to think and think. After 5 minutes, he picked up his slate. Very well, he wrote. It's a deal. Then he picked up his trumpet. Oh, ever in the greening spring, he played, by bank and bough retiring. The waterfowl stopped swimming and listened. The keepers stopped what they were doing and listened. Sam listened. The head man in his office in the birdhouse laid down his pencil, leaned back in his chair, and listened. The sound of Lewis's horn was in the air, and the whole world seemed better and brighter and wider and freer and happier and dreamier. That's a good tune, said Sam. What is it? Oh, just something I made up myself, wrote Lewis on his slate.